At 65, Chuck Miller rebuilt his life in the remote, muddy embrace of a Thai farm, escaping the pain of a broken marriage. 2 years later, his two successful American daughters came to Thailand, only to be swept into a global crisis. Borders closed, flights stopped. They were instantly forced into a 6-month isolation on that distant land. Could a global pandemic mend the deep wounds of their past, or would the confinement tear them apart forever? Join us to discover how a global pandemic disaster impacted this single dad. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. The gavel struck on a frigid morning in early January 2021, the sharp, decisive sound echoing the finality that Charles Miller had been dreading for months. At 65 years old, he had just been handed his life summation, and the verdict was clear loss. Charles, known as Chuck, was a man whose hands had always been in the soil. A distinguished agricultural engineer, he had spent 4 decades designing irrigation systems. The divorce from Eleanor, his wife of 40 years, had been brutal. The house in Iowa and the bulk of his retirement savings were gone meticulously divided by the court. Chuck stood outside the courthouse, the winter air biting deep. He was financially solvent enough to rent a small, sterile apartment, but he was emotionally bankrupt. The girls, Sarah and Emma, were supportive but busy with their own successful adult lives. Chuck felt adrift. Later that week, while packing a box of old documents, he found a brittle, decades-old postcard from his cousin, Somchai. Somchai had dedicated himself to traditional farming in Thailand. An idea, a tiny ember of possibility began to glow. He wouldn't just escape. He would seek refuge with the one person who truly understood the language of the land. He called Somchai. "Ah, the land is good for the tired heart," Cousin Somchai replied. "Come, the jungle is messy, but the rain is warm and the fruit is sweet. I have a small guest house. It is simple, but safe. Come." Within 3 weeks, Chuck was on a long-haul flight across the Pacific, landing in Bangkok in late February 2021. The heat and humidity were a shocking contrast to the Iowa deep freeze he had left behind. Somchai met him, embracing him with genuine warmth. Somchai's farm was several hours outside the city. Chuck observed Somchai working his land with a slow, knowing rhythm. "You use very little technology," Somchai, Chuck noted one evening. Somchai smiled. "Technology is good, Chuck, for speed, but I use the technology of the earth. She tells me what she needs. My job is only to listen." Just as Chuck began to settle into this gentle routine, fate delivered its next shattering blow. One quiet morning, less than 2 weeks after Chuck's arrival, Somchai collapsed while tending a banana grove. He was gone within the hour, succumbing to a sudden, massive stroke. A few days after the funeral, Somchai's local lawyer, Ms. Duankamol, informed Chuck of the will. "Uncle Somchai had no children, Mr. Miller. He viewed you as his intellectual successor. He has bequeathed everything to you. The land, the farmhouse, the equipment, all 5 hectares. Chuck was stunned, but Ms. Duankamol was firm. "It is yours, Mr. Miller." Chuck took the keys and walked the perimeter of his unexpected inheritance. He saw the massive, crushing damage wrought by a tropical depression that had swept through the area just before Christmas 2020. The rice paddies were stagnant, mature fruit trees were snapped, and irrigation ditches were choked with debris. The farm was a disaster zone. Chuck knelt and scooped a handful of the soil. It was thick, sodden clay, poorly drained, desperately crying out for aeration and structure. The work required here was a monumental agricultural engineering challenge. He realized this was a problem statement tailored precisely to his unique expertise. He remembered the final crushing loss in the courtroom. Here, on this ravaged land, a new purpose lay exposed. Charles Chuck Miller, 65 years old, retired, divorced, and newly orphaned in a strange land, found his reason to stay. This ravaged farm in Thailand was his final mission. The next day, he put on a pair of borrowed rubber boots, grabbed a shovel, and walked out into the mud. The first day's work was agonizing. Chuck, still wearing the lightweight shirts he'd packed for a short visit, stood ankle-deep in thick, warm mud. The 5 hectares of land were a systemic failure, requiring a fundamental large-scale remediation project. He began with a shovel. Within 20 minutes, his shirt was soaked through, plastered to his 65-year-old frame. His back screamed in protest. He spent the first week simply clearing the main canals and debris, driven forward by methodical persistence. He worked from dawn until the midday heat made movement unbearable. The immediate neighbor to the south was a woman the village called Auntie Knock. She farmed a beautiful plot, often watching Chuck with a polite but distinctly cool expression. One afternoon, Chuck took a break near the dilapidated fence line. "Sawadi crap," Auntie Knock Chuck greeted her. "Sawadi ka lung Charles," she replied. Chuck pointed to the choked drainage trench on his property. "The soil is so heavy here. The drainage is terrible. I'm trying to rebuild the slope." Auntie Knock finally looked up. "The soil is heavy because the earth is tired of being rushed, lung Charles. You try to use strength. The earth does not respond to strength. She responds to patience." Chuck recognized the truth in her words. He knew he was being tested. He changed his methods, thinking like a scientist. He began soil analysis, observing texture and drainage rates. He then used his engineering mind to devise a long-term drainage plan, calculating the necessary grade changes and the placement of raised beds. He spent days painstakingly digging deep channels and filling them with rocks and organic matter to create French drains. This was slow, careful work, an act of faith in the unseen foundation of the land. One afternoon, Chuck noticed a problem on Auntie Knock's plot. Her turmeric and ginger were suffering from waterlogging due to runoff from the storm. Chuck walked over. "Auntie Knock, I apologize. The water's backing up here because of my initial digging. I can fix this. We need to give the excess water a clear path around the roots. I can show you how to combine your traditional knowledge of planting mounds with a simple engineered channel." Auntie Knock watched him as Chuck spent the next 2 hours on his hands and knees. He used a trowel and a piece of string to ensure the water channel was perfectly graded at a slight consistent angle. He showed her how to mix sandy loam into her soil to strengthen her planting mounds. He spoke about capillary action and percolation rates, while she spoke about the best phases of the moon for planting ginger. Slowly, the reserve in Auntie Knock's eyes began to soften. When he finished, she brought him a small clay jar of freshly brewed herbal tea and a bag of dark, rich compost. "This is from my buffalo," she said simply. "Better than anything in a sack. And the trench is good, lung Charles. You listen to the water now." That simple bag of compost mixed with his engineered soil amendments was the moment Western science and Thai tradition merged. He had earned his place. As weeks turned into the muggy heat of March and April 2021, the transformation was slow but undeniable. Chuck had carved out an area of several raised beds built high and firm. He planted his first set of test crops, native beans, and resilient root vegetables. One morning, while inspecting the soil, he saw it, a tiny, hopeful green sprout, pushing its way through the dark, rich dirt. And then another. And another. Chuck knelt in the mud, utterly overwhelmed by emotion. He remembered the finality of the gavel and the feeling of utter defeat. The growth of these small sprouts was proof. It was proof that he was still useful. He had found salvation in the relentless, honest work of his final mission. Every sprouted seed was a small victory against despair, helping Chuck heal from his grief and find true inner peace on the land that Uncle Somchai had so wisely entrusted to him. By the blazing heat of late June 2021, the farm was no longer a disaster zone. It was a statement. Chuck's methodical, engineering-driven approach, blended with Auntie Knock's traditional wisdom, had resurrected the land. The mud had receded, replaced by meticulously laid French drains and a series of high, stable raised beds. Chuck designed an ingenious gravity-fed irrigation system that recycled rainwater, a level of efficiency revolutionary for the small Thai village. The farm blossomed into a vibrant living laboratory, a model of clean organic agriculture. Chuck focused on high-value native Thai produce, galangal root kaffir lime leaf specialized chilies, and rare indigenous herbs. The initial success of the crops brought the first real financial relief. Chuck began selling his produce at the local market. His products commanded a premium because of their exceptional quality and organic cultivation. Other farmers started visiting Chuck's farm to stare at the deep, dark topsoil and the healthy, pest-free state of his plants. Chuck, remembering the purpose his engineering lectures used to give him, began offering informal, free guidance on sustainable farming techniques. He held short sessions under the shade of the mango trees. He demonstrated solarization using the sun's heat to sterilize the topsoil without chemicals. He would also show how to use simple locally sourced materials to create compost teas. This was knowledge sharing in its purest form. But stability was still precarious. The income from the market was enough for day-to-day operations, but the costs of rebuilding the farmhouse and maintaining the large irrigation system were substantial. Chuck realized he needed a system that was financially sustainable and tied to his expertise. He decided to leverage his knowledge and the exotic location to create an agri-tourism and Thai traditional education center. The goal was to attract small groups of international tourists interested in learning sustainable tropical farming methods. They would be students paying for specialized short courses. He took the remainder of his limited savings, secured a small loan, and began construction. Over the next few months, he built the open-air classroom and 2 small durable bungalows on concrete stilts to withstand flooding. By the beginning of October 2021, the Sustainable Agriculture and Education Center was ready for business. Chuck marketed the center online, targeting an older, affluent Western demographic. The first scheduled course, Tropical Organic Farming Traditional Wisdom Meets Modern Engineering, was set for early 2022. Chuck had finally found the economic solution. He had transformed the farm into a self-sustaining entity whose value was tied directly to his unique knowledge. It was a true reflection of his final mission, turning the ravaged land into a miracle of rebirth, anchored by purpose and protected by a robust business model. The year 2022 arrived, bringing with it the first successful agricultural education groups. Chuck found immense satisfaction in his new role as a teacher. The income from the courses stabilized the farm's finances. But as the farm blossomed, one part of Chuck's life remained stubbornly fallow: his relationship with his daughters. The connection with Sarah, 37, the sharp marketing professional, and Emma, 34, the talented chef, was polite but distant, a frail connection. They saw the farmer. They did not see the man who had survived emotional ruin. In the late spring of 2022, Chuck received an email that caused his heart to thump with excitement. The girls wrote that they had planned a month-long trip through Southeast Asia. As a final stop before heading back to the U.S., they had booked a week to see the farm. "We want to witness the miracle farm in person," Dad Emma wrote. Chuck prepared meticulously, seeing this as a precious 7 days to bridge the gap. Sarah and Emma arrived in early July 2022. They were vibrant, stylish, and utterly out of place in the humid landscape. They were genuinely impressed by the beauty of the farm. "Dad, this is incredible. You actually built an empire out here," Sarah said. "It's not an empire, sweetie. It's a purposeful life," Chuck corrected. The week was pleasant but hectic. The girls wanted to see temples and visit night markets. Chuck spent the week trying to keep up with their pace, feeling the gap between his quiet world and their fast-paced life widening. Then, halfway through their planned stay, the world shifted. In mid-July 2022, a localized resurgence of the COVID-19 threat, combined with new highly infectious variants, began to spread rapidly across the region. The response from the Thai government was swift and severe. The first notice came as a news alert on Emma's phone: international flights suspended indefinitely. Then came the local decree: borders closed, inter-provincial travel restricted, all internal transportation ground to a halt. Sarah's booked flight out of Bangkok was canceled, then Emma's. The airport sent an email: all international flights for the next 6 weeks were grounded with no immediate timeline for resumption. Panic set in. Dad, what are we going to do? I have clients. Emma has a restaurant. We can't just stay here, Sarah cried. Chuck was the calmest person in the room. We can't leave right now, girls. The farm is safe. We have food, we have water, we have shelter. We are here until the borders reopen. We will be here for 6 months or however long it takes. The three of them were forced into isolation. This was the force majeure, the intervention of fate. The first few weeks were tense. Boredom eventually forced them out of the house and into the necessity of the farm. A change in roles began slowly. The pump is struggling with the new pressure, Chuck replied to Emma one morning. The intake valve needs clearing, but it's a muddy job. Emma grabbed a pair of rubber boots. I'm a chef. I deal with hot water and sharp objects. I can handle mud. Soon, the daughters were integrated into the rhythms of the farm. Sarah took charge of inventory and created a systematic layout for the massive herb drying room. Emma, with her chef's precise knowledge of flavor profiles, helped Auntie Knock harvest spices at their peak potency. They witnessed their father's dedication and resilience firsthand. They saw the respect he commanded from the village. The forced 6-month stay had begun as a nightmare, but it was fast becoming the most authentic shared experience the three of them had ever known. The farm was no longer just his eccentric project. It was their sanctuary, and for the first time in years, they were a family working side by side in the mud, breathing the same humid, spice-scented air. The weeks following the July 2022 border closure were defined by forced intimacy. Sarah and Emma's initial panic eventually curdled into a resentful boredom, which in turn slowly yielded to the necessity of life on the farm. They couldn't leave, they couldn't shop, and they certainly couldn't dine out. They were tethered to their father's world. This forced isolation was the essential bitter ingredient needed for the family to finally sit still. The surface pleasantries of their weekly video calls, the "How are the crops?" and "How is the city?" had been stripped away by shared labor and the inescapable proximity of the tropical heat. The change began in the evenings after the heavy rain had passed and the jungle chorus began its nightly song. With nowhere to go, they would sit on the porch of the main farmhouse, sipping tea made from the farm's own lemongrass. One night after a long, quiet dinner, the conversation drifted away from the farm's irrigation needs and landed squarely on the past. "Did you ever miss Iowa?" Dad Emma asked softly, watching the fireflies dance over the rice paddies. Chuck sighed, looking out at the darkness. "I missed the idea of what Iowa was supposed to be. I missed my routine, but I didn't miss the fighting." Sarah, normally guarded, spoke up, her voice quiet and strained. "We just didn't understand why you let Mom take everything, why you didn't fight for the house, for your projects. We felt like you gave up." This was the wound that had festered beneath the surface of their polite communications. Chuck knew it was time for the deep conversations. "I didn't give up on myself, girls. I gave up on conflict." Chuck explained, choosing his words carefully. "I realized that the things your mother and I were fighting over, money, property, material possessions, they were what hollowed out our marriage in the first place. Fighting for them would have only made me more bitter, more hollow." He paused, glancing at the fertile land around them. "When I came here in February 2021, I had nothing but 2 suitcases and 40 years of agricultural knowledge. I realized that the only thing worth fighting for was my purpose, And that purpose wasn't in those legal documents. It was here in the soil, in making something clean and meaningful out of a disaster. The girls were silent, processing this truth. They had always viewed their father's move as an eccentric retreat, a post-divorce exile. Now they were seeing it as an act of profound self-preservation. As the weeks turned into late August and September 2022, their perception of Chuck shifted daily. They were not just hearing about his resilience, they were living it. They saw him wake before sunrise, checking the nursery beds, tracking the moisture levels with the precision of a doctor monitoring a patient. They saw him gently instruct the local workers, respected, not because he was the owner, but because he was the hardest worker. Emma spent hours in the communal kitchen helping Auntie Knock process the herbs. She discovered that the complex earthy aroma of the farm's galangal was richer than any ingredient she could buy in a New York market. One afternoon, Emma confided in Chuck about the immense pressure of running a high-end restaurant, the exhaustion, and the fear of failure. Chuck listened something he hadn't truly done during the quick calls from Iowa. Pressure is just energy honey. You just have to decide what form you want to convert it into. Out here, we convert pressure into growth. Sarah, meanwhile, had immersed herself in the farm's operations. She saw the inefficiency in Chuck's record-keeping and the lack of professional branding for the center. Her marketing mind, usually focused on million-dollar campaigns, found a new challenge in the simplicity of the farm. One evening, Sarah sat Chuck down with a ledger. "Dad, your expenses are tight, but your product is world-class. You need to tell the story." The story isn't about farming. It's about a 65-year-old engineer who rebuilt his life in the mud. That's premium content. This was the beginning of new cooperation. Sarah started thinking about sleek, simple packaging for the farm's specialty herbs and spices using the logo of the Agri-Tourism Center. She developed a proposal for an online subscription service targeting American chefs and specialty food stores. Emma, inspired by the intense flavors she was encountering, spent her days experimenting. She began meticulously documenting new recipes using the unique Thai herbs and produce recipes that maximize their flavor and preserve their freshness, knowing that the quality was unparalleled. The forced 6 months transformed the dynamic. The daughters realized their father hadn't retreated into failure. He had advanced into genuine peace and meaning. He was healthier, calmer, and more fundamentally content than he had been in the last decade of his marriage. Their own resentments and anxieties, so dominant in New York and Chicago, seemed small against the backdrop of the vast jungle and the honest demands of the soil. By the time the borders showed signs of reopening in late December 2022, the family bond was restored, becoming closer and more loving. The isolation had forced them to see Chuck not as the victim of a divorce, but as a survivor who had mastered the art of starting over. They were no longer just daughters and a father. They were partners with a shared purpose, united by the smell of rich Thai earth and the quiet strength of the man who had found his place in it. By the new year of 2023, the international air travel corridors had cautiously begun to reopen. The 6-month isolation on the farm was over. The day Sarah and Emma finally boarded their flight back to the United States was bittersweet. There was relief to return to their careers, but also genuine sadness at leaving the profound peace and shared purpose they had found. They didn't bring back typical tourist souvenirs. They brought business plans, meticulously labeled jars of dried herbs and vacuum-sealed bags of unique Thai spices. The seeds of the family business idea had been planted on Chuck's farm and nurtured through months of forced cooperation. This is not just a farm, Dad Sarah had asserted on their final night reviewing her marketing notes. It's a specialty supplier. We are the exclusive distributors. Emma the chef agreed. The flavor profile of this kaffir lime, it's something you can't get in a standard U.S. market. It's too expensive to ship fresh, but we can process and preserve the best of it. The plan they hammered out was brilliant in its simplicity, targeting a niche distribution strategy that leveraged their existing professional networks. They knew that competing with large-scale importers was impossible. Their value lay in the quality, the exotic nature of the ingredients, and most importantly, the powerful story of the 65-year-old engineer farmer. Upon arriving back in New York and Chicago, the daughters immediately put the plan into action. Chuck, back in Thailand, was tasked with scaling up the processing of high-demand items, drying the galangal and chili peppers, creating concentrated essence oils, and vacuum sealing the most aromatic tea blends. Auntie Nak oversaw the traditional preparation methods, ensuring authenticity, while Chuck applied his engineering rigor to the drying and packaging process to maximize shelf life without chemicals. The sales channels quickly materialized, led by Emma's professional influence. Emma's high-end restaurant in Manhattan, known for its creative, globally inspired cuisine, became the premier showcase. She redesigned a small section of her menu, highlighting dishes that featured the farm's spices and herbs, promoting them as sourced exclusively from Miller Family Organic Farm, Thailand. Emma quickly discovered that the quality was so superior that the products sold themselves. Other top chefs, always hungry for unique, high-quality ingredients, began reaching out. Emma, using her restaurant as a testing lab and a distribution point, slowly began providing small batches to her network of colleagues. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on direct marketing and logistics. She knew the general American consumer would struggle with the cost of small batch specialty items. Instead, she targeted two specific groups: Thai expat markets. Sarah reached out to community leaders and owners of small, authentic Asian grocery stores. These businesses valued the quality and traditional cultivation methods, recognizing the authentic flavors of home. Pre-order online channels. She set up a small, elegant online subscription service for dedicated home cooks and food bloggers, marketing the story of the rebuilding engineer as much as the product. The logistics were complex, involving customs forms, phytosanitary certificates, and high air freight costs, but Sarah handled the paperwork with the same organized intensity she used for corporate marketing campaigns. The high cost of shipping was justified by the product's rarity and quality. The venture proved successful almost immediately. It was never going to make Chuck a millionaire, but the income was substantial enough to eliminate the bank loan and provide a solid financial cushion for the education center. More profound than the financial success, however, was the success of the legacy and connection. Every shipment that left the port in Thailand was a tangible exchange of love and care. When Chuck received Sarah's meticulously organized order forms, he saw not just a list of inventory, but his daughter's devotion to his new life. When Emma sent photos of a new dish she created using his homegrown turmeric, Chuck felt the pride of a father whose work was valued by his child. The farm, originally a burden and a symbol of loss, became the central pillar of their family identity. The divorce had fragmented them, but the shared purpose of the farm had reunited them, transforming their relationship into a deep collaborative partnership. The family was no longer communicating through forced weekly calls. They were communicating through the language of spices, recipes, and sales forecasts. Every small triumph, a successful air freight delivery, a glowing review from a New York critic, or a fully funded course at the education center was a shared victory. This successful venture proved that the collaboration was not just financial. It was a symbol of their restored family trust and connection. Chuck no longer felt like a forgotten footnote in his daughters' lives. He was their essential partner, the root from which their shared future was growing. By the spring of 2024, 3 years after Chuck Miller had first arrived in Thailand as a broken, divorced man, the transformation was complete. The 5 hectares of once ravaged land pulsed with life and purpose. Chuck, now 68 years old, stood on the porch of the rebuilt farmhouse. His skin was tanned and lined not with the worry that had marked his American life, but with the honest exposure to the tropical sun. His frame was leaner, stronger, hardened by years of honest labor. He was still Charles Miller, the meticulous engineer, but the bitterness and grief of the past were gone, replaced by a deep, quiet contentment. He was the living proof of true happiness, that age is no barrier to starting anew. He had successfully launched 4 profitable educational courses through the Agri-Tourism Center. He was a respected teacher, a valued community member, and an innovative farmer whose methods were studied by visitors from across the globe. He had not only restored the land to health, but had successfully restored his own soul. His daily life was a cycle of meaningful tasks, checking the drainage systems, calibrating the herb drying racks, and tutoring the local children in basic arithmetic after school. He felt utterly and completely useful. The fear of ending his days as a forgotten retiree in a sterile Iowa apartment was now a distant, irrelevant nightmare. The success of the farm was inextricably tied to the success of his family. The Bridge of Specialty Goods venture managed by Sarah and Emma was thriving. Every order, every email exchange about inventory or logistics was a continuous long-distance conversation of love and collaboration. Sarah, the marketing executive, visited twice a year, bringing her Chicago efficiency and leaving behind a fresh wave of excitement about the farm's online presence. Emma, the chef, came annually for a long stretch during her restaurant's slow season. She didn't come as a tourist. She came as a partner working side by side with Auntie Knock to discover new indigenous ingredients and to film videos for the center's website. The daughters saw their father clearly now. They saw a man who had stared down personal disaster and chosen creation over collapse. Their relationship had moved far beyond the distant politeness of the past. It was a strong, active partnership rooted in shared purpose. Chuck no longer felt like a footnote. He was the vital, essential root of their joint venture. One humid afternoon, while Chuck and Auntie Knock were sorting a particularly abundant harvest of turmeric, Auntie Knock stopped working and looked at him. "You came here to die, Lung Charles," she said simply, with no malice, only observation, "but the soil made you grow instead." Chuck smiled, nodding. "The soil and the people, Auntie Knock. You showed me that Western science can only do so much. You taught me how to listen to the earth." The farm was more than just a business. It was the living legacy. It was Uncle Samchai's dream of traditional farming, imbued with the modern, sustainable spirit of Chuck Miller and his daughters. It was a fusion of 2 continents and 2 lifetimes of knowledge, a truly international testament to resilience. In a quiet moment as the sun set, Chuck reflected on the final painful chapter of his American life. The divorce had felt like an ending, a complete and total loss. He had lost the house, the savings, and the familiar life he had planned. But now he understood that losing everything was ultimately a liberation. It was the shattering of a structure that was already weak, forcing him to seek true value in purpose, not possessions. The fight he thought he had lost in the courtroom had actually led him to the greatest victory of his life, the restoration of his own heart and the profound reconnection with his children. He hadn't retired. He had reinvented. He hadn't retreated. He had launched his final, most meaningful career. Chuck Miller, 68 years old, stood on his porch listening to the peaceful sounds of his thriving farm and the cheerful murmur of his daughters talking business across the video connection. He felt the lasting peace he had engineered himself, one spadeful of mud, one lesson, and one spice shipment at a time. His life, rebuilt from the ground up, was a testament to the powerful, enduring human capacity for growth and renewal. He had faced the loss, endured the hardship, and realized the conclusion. His cup was not just full, it was overflowing with purpose, deep family bonds, and lasting peace. The true lesson of Chuck Miller's story is this. Sometimes losing everything is the unexpected gift that frees us to rebuild on a foundation of genuine purpose. He found that the greatest harvest isn't money or status, but the deep abiding connection forged through shared struggle. If this story of resilience and restored family bonds touched your heart, please help us share this message of hope by subscribing and leaving a comment below. To see another incredible story about second chances, click on the video now appearing on your screen.